Hello everyone, it's Mary. Welcome back to the channel. This video is a doozy. It's quite long for my kind of videos, but I had so much fun putting together this compilation of the myriad of ways to color your images. Sometimes coloring can be daunting for me, and so I wanted to provide so many different ways that you can look at and think of and just get outside the creative box so that you can have more fun with the process of some of those images that are created for coloring. Okay, a couple disclaimers right up front. I am going to be using a lot of the products from the new Simon Hurley release that just came out. If you want to check out those details, look in the description box below the video. You're going to see a list of all the supplies I use, the tools I show in the video. I won't stop at every tool, but they will be listed below. And always in the comment section, you can hit me up with questions. I'm available. All right, so let's get started with this first card. So I'm going to be stamping and heat embossing both cardstocks. One is a Bristol smooth cardstock and one is a watercolor cardstock. Because I'm going to be using two different coloring mediums, I wanted to use the best cardstock for the mediums I'm going to be using. So that is really what this video is also going to do. I'm going to take you through tips, tricks, pro tips, all those things to get you the best results possible. I will also try to put as many of the time hacks or stamps on the screen that say if you want to skip this section, move to the next, because I'm trying to make sure that I'm conscious and respectful of your time. At the same time, I know there's a lot of people that want to see more detail, so I'm trying to hit all the masses here, okay? All right, so let's get going with this first one. I'm using a Misty Stampin' Positioner tool. You might have seen I had to remove that foam piece because this is a rubber stamp and you need that extra space to be able to stamp properly. So a couple things here. Make sure you use an anti-static powder tool on your cardstock first. That gets rid of all of the static so your embossing powder will stick to your image. And then I'm using a sticky ink, many on the market, embossing sticky ink, clear, and then I'm going to pour over my white embossing powder. So all the while, another tip is to have your heat gun warming up. The hotter your heat gun is, the less warping you're going to get in your cardstock. So I take my little silicone mat here and I'm going to heat set that. Now that's going to make the embossing powder melt, and now I'm going to have a barrier. Okay, so you recall we have this heat embossed. Now the first cardstock I have in front of us is Bristol Smooth cardstock. Bristol Smooth is fantastic for two coloring mediums. One is when you're ink blending. It blends like butter, okay? That's the first one. The second one is water brush pens, and that'll come later in the video. So Bristol Smooth, highly recommend. I don't recommend making bases with your Bristol Smooth because it's a little bit on the pricier side of cardstock, and so you want to cut that down just for your panels. So I pulled out my ink blending brushes because this specific stamp set has coordinating stencils. And I really like that Simon Hurley has moved into that space because it really does make coloring fun and easy and fast. So I do appreciate that about this combination. So these candles right here, it's a two-set stencil. So the first one obviously doesn't have the flames because the flames are going to be a different color. And so I'm going to take my little blending brushes here. Now I started with the blending brushes with the handle, but they were almost a little bit too big. So I went to my finger dauber blending brushes. Cannot recommend them enough. They come in neutral colors. They come in, well, the brush itself is white, but I'm talking about like the little finger part. And that's so that you can keep coordinating with your inks and you don't have to be mixing. So highly recommend them. Everybody that has talked to me and bought them just absolutely loves them. So that's what I'm using for these. And this is a really important part of this because if you use too big of a brush, you're going to cross your colors. And for my design here, what I was trying to do is keep them individually or at least blend just a tiny bit on the edges. All right. Next, I'm going to take the second stencil and I'm going to place that over my images as well. And I'm going to use this for the flames. Now, this stencil doesn't provide the details that the stamp does. And so that's why I'm using both. I wanted the details of the different imagery within each candle, but you can use this stencil all on its own and just get solid colors. So I just wanted to make sure that I put that point out there. All right, so I'm gonna go through, finish up with the second piece of the stencil. This is really the first way that I'm talking about coloring your images. When you have a set that does coordinate with the stencil, it makes it super duper easy. So yay. That's really good. Now, one thing I didn't do was go back and wipe this with a microfiber cloth. What that's going to do is bring all of that white embossing powder, because you can't color that. It's going to wipe clean. You're going to have really bright images. So I didn't show that in the video, but that's something you can do. And here's a quick peek at the finished part of it, but I wanted to make sure that I showed you what that kind of looked like once you're done with the coloring. Let's move into the next kind of coloring. And you know, I'm a fan of using what you have. So if you want to do some watercoloring and you have some dye inks, distress oxide inks on hand, you can place them down on a surface, a non-porous surface, get out a water brush and just color this in. What makes it so easy, because now we're on the watercolor cardstock, I heat emboss these images also there, is that I sort of have that well that's going to hold the water and the color in just a little bit better. Now it's very, very small, so you can't, you know, flood it with color and with water, but it really does help the process. And so I definitely want to recommend using what you have. If you have those types of inks, just scribble them on a non-porous surface and get to having some fun. Now, the one thing about watercolor ink is, or watercoloring is, most are going to dry back and lighten up just a little bit. So I'm going to see in comparison from the ink blending colors to the watercolor colors, you're going to see a pretty strong difference between the two. To me, not one is better than the other. It really just depends on what you're going for. And also the time that you want to take. I think the watercoloring took a little bit longer. I would probably say double the time, if I'm honest, because I went through and did a second layer on some of these colors to get it more vibrant. Whereas the ink blending is just bada bing, bada boom. You put the brushes down and your color is done. And so those are things to consider when you're sitting down to your craft table and what you're inspired to do. So I went back and of course filled in. I love watercoloring with the mix and blend of colors. It makes it super simple and easy, and they blend really, really nicely. Ink blending blends nicely as well, but I just feel like there's just a quicker catch when you have that you know, the water mixed in with the watercoloring. Okay, so just keep in mind, I did use the same exact colors in the Distress Oxide line for my ink blending as I did with the watercoloring. And I wanted to do that so that you can really get an idea of apples to apples when you see the two different images finished. Now here I kept this in here, so I wanted to show you the second layer and what that can do, and to kind of try to get a little bit of that gradient as well, just putting a little darker on certain parts of your coloring. And so that is something to have just a grand old time with. So highly recommend. Kept this in as well, went back and put a little bit more darker color onto my images. Again, I would say it probably took double the time. All right, so that's definitely something I wanted to share with all of you. Now, I can't waste ink, and so I had this palette here, spritzed it down with my water, and then I took another piece of watercolor cardstock and I just mixed and blended and smushed and made a background. And so I'm going to put that background aside. You won't see it in this video, but I'm sure it'll make an appearance in a future video. All right, so that was super fun with the watercoloring. But before we close up this one completely, I did go back in with some gray, and I tried to add a bit of a shadow around each of the candles, as if the light was coming from the, like looking at the card from the left-hand side. Sort of, you can kind of see I'm putting a little bit of that shadow onto the right-hand side of the candle. Okay, so that's just something you can add for a little bit of extra flair if you like. All right, so let's take a look at these two. Now you have the ink blended color, and then you have the watercolor color. So you can see the differences there. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this video was because I know personally, I really want to get in my craft room more and use the things that I have already. And I thought maybe if I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed on ways to use stuff, that someone else might be out there too. And so I'm hoping that this is helpful for all of you. So let's move on to doing the next coloring. And this is kind of no coloring at all. And so I'm going to skip all the steps that were in, real life where I heat embossed and did all that. And I'm just going to heat set this. This is one of the images there from that stamp set. And then once I cut that out and I decide I'm going to use it on the front of my project, I realized that I just wanted to add a little bit of oomph to it. That's another thing you can think about is if you've done all the work on the coloring of a background, maybe you just put a black and white image or a black and white sentiment on the front and it really does make it pop. But I wanted to make it pop with some pops of color. See what I did? Is that a mom joke? Oh, glad my kids aren't here. All right, so I'm going to take these pops of color and I'm going to just use rainbow colors and I'm going to add them to the polka dots. I thought that was so fun. It gave just a hint of dimension and something interesting. And so I was really glad that I did that. So you can kind of see it coordinates with the candles as well. So that's how I did the next coloring bit. You can kind of see the dimension right here. This is when it's dried. And so, yeah, so I was really happy with that. Now, the next part I took the clear glitter pops of color, and I'm just going to add that to the flames. Don't worry, I'm going to show you a much faster drying time way to do this technique later on in the video. But this was really fun because I love that glitter and sparkle and sheen that it gave to the flame. So that was fun to add to the card as well. All right, we are moving on to the next one. And another thing that Simon Hurley is knocking out of the park is this ability to take apart the stamps, the background stamps. I think that's so cool. He has some where there's like space in the middle for sentiments, and then you can use that as a standalone stamp. So he really is trying to maximize what we're doing. That is how you can tell art supplies, card supplies are made by a card maker, in my opinion. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to stamp this centerpiece of the candles onto, again, Bristol Smooth Cardstock, because we're going to do some watercoloring with real brush pens, and also some regular accent opaque in the 80-pound cardstock. And that is going to be what we're doing here first. Why? Because it's great cardstock for your alcohol markers. And so we're going to do that first with some alcohol-friendly ink. I'm using the Memento Tuxedo Black ink. So that's going to make sure that my markers don't bleed. And then I'm going to show you how this stamps out right here. And then the next thing that we're going to stamp is going to be in the VersaFine Nocturne Clair, and that's going to be for the Bristol. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but we'll go through it step by step. I'm going to take my scrubber tool here, which I've been looking for a while. I know it's out of stock in a lot of places, but side note, you can use one of those paint trimmer edges. It's the same exact material. Someone had pointed out to us, and so if you want to save some money and time looking for that thing, just grab up one of those from like Home Depot. Okay, so now I have my cardstock down in the Misty is the Bristol Smooth, and I'm going to use some watercolor friendly ink, not alcohol marker, but watercolor friendly ink. So think of it this way, two main black inks that you should have in your stash if you have these mediums. One is an alcohol friendly ink, and two is a watercolor friendly ink. Sometimes you can find it all in one. So if you have recommendations of which all in one down below, let us know in the comments. So here is the embossing powder I'm going to use for the VersaFine Nocturne Clair ink that I'm going to be using for watercoloring. Why? Because I couldn't find my clear embossing powder. That's the only reason. So I was like, all right, let me just grab what is next to me, and here it was, which I'm so glad it was because it's so fun. This embossing powder has to be one of my favorites. That's not like the neutrals or the normal ones that I use all the time. So that's super fun. All right, we're going to take a pause here, and I'm going to talk to you about my Ohuhu alcohol marker color sheets and downloads that you can get if you're interested. If you have the 320 set of the brush markers from Ohuhu, I have created an over 100 blend for those markers. So there are 100 plus blends with 3 and 4 colors in each blend through all the colors in the rainbow. And you can catch that on my Etsy shop, which will be below. So you can check that out. I honestly, this was the one that I put the most time and effort into. You can print that out, you can swatch it out yourself, or if you get the bundle, you actually can just have pictures of my charts along with some other goodies in there. So check that out below. If you have questions, let me know. Let's get to coloring with these alcohol markers. So if you are newer to alcohol markers, or if you find them intimidating, I want you to know you're not alone. This is something I think a lot of us are afraid to jump into, because people, when we watch them color, they make it look easy, but we know that it's complicated when we sit down and try to do it ourselves. So a couple things I want to draw attention to when you're dealing with alcohol markers is you got to have good cardstock. You can't for example, you can't alcohol marker very well, in my opinion, on watercolor cardstock or like Bristol smooth cardstock, right? So I believe the cardstock does have its place. I am using the accent opaque cardstock here. There are others that work well with alcohol markers, so you can probably find that on a YouTube video. I know I've done a comparison with cardstock. I checked out the Michaels brand, the Nina Classic Crest Solar White, the popular one amongst a lot of crafters. And then I also compared it to the Accent Opaque. So, you know, these are three that work well. There are others. So you want the right cardstock. That's number one. Number two, I honestly feel like the alcohol, I've done like 2 full videos on alcohol marker comparisons, and I really think they are all pretty comparable. The main difference between a Copic and an Ohuhu, for example, Copic is the more expensive one. They can run about $7 a marker, is that there's a system already generated for the Copic line. So you know exactly which ones go with which color blends. You don't really have to do, you can swatch them out, of course, but you don't really have to do a lot of thinking when it comes to the Copic brand. Ohuhu is not so much. And quite honestly, I'm grateful for that, because they are exponentially cheaper. So for example, a marker set of 320 markers, which is all the colors you'll ever need, is about $244. And so math on that, I'm not going to do public math here, but it's really, really less expensive than the Copics. And so that was the major kind of rub or, you know, con to the Ohuhu markers, was not knowing which colors went well with each other because the caps don't match. And so anyway, if you want more information, like I said before, it'll be below. So when you're coloring with your markers, good paper, you know, alcohol marker really doesn't matter in my opinion. Just choose whatever you have, but you do want to get colors that are close together. If you're too far off, they're not going to blend very well. And then it's really just about moving back and forth with the coloring. And so you can watch this demonstration here. I'm really just going from the darkest piece of it. You know, where do I want my shadows? I'm going to place that down. Sometimes people put the lighter color first to saturate the paper. Once you get that paper saturated, the colors blend a little bit better. So that's another tip. And so just play with it. That is really the best way to get better at any kind of coloring, is just coloring, having a good time, and all along the way. And don't you dare tell yourself that it's not good, okay? This is all fun and practice, and we are on this journey of creativity, probably, if you're like me, to escape all of the negativity out there and all the things going on. So don't add more to it, okay? Just have fun. All right, so I'm going to do some coloring now inside of my images, and this is another option that you can do. So I'm going to pull out my embossing pen. So the sticky ink that I was stamping with before, this is in the pen form. I'm going to color up my little images there within the flame, and then I'm going to pour some glitter clear embossing powder over it. And this is going to give me the same effect, the sheen, this little shine there, the glitter, and the clarity too, because it's not opaque, that I was using the pops of color for. So that's another option too, and it's super fast because it dries right away. And so I would recommend that as well. So that was a lot of fun to do. Embossing pens, definitely recommend having those, because you can find a lot of use for that. Just kind of putting the embossing stuff where you want it, not all over the place. And I finished this card off with pretty clean and simple. I just added a celebrate sentiment right there in the center, and that was it. Let's go on to the next one. So the next kind of coloring we're going to do is on the same image, but remember we heat embossed it with that black glittery embossing powder. And so now I'm going to be using some watercolor pens. I love, again, with the embossing to use as sort of that well. And so if you're going to heat set or heat emboss with powder over your black ink, then you really don't have to worry too much about the ink being water friendly because you're covering it with some embossing powder. But the VersaFine Clair Nocturne Black ink actually does already stay wet, so you can use it as embossing ink as well, just like we did with the clear sticky ink. Okay, all right, so now I'm going to color up these images using some Arteza Real Brush water pens. So I have two different shades in each of the color hues, so 2 reds, 2 oranges, 2 yellows, so on. I am going to place down, because I'm on Bristol Smooth Cardstock now, remember, I'm going to place down the first color, and I'm going to I'm going to use the darker color first. And then I'm going to take the next lighter color, and I'm going to put that right in next to it. So here's the lighter color. Then I'm going to leave a space open, because now I'm going to take this is a marker from Zig, and it's like a blender marker, but you can use a water brush. I like the blending marker because sometimes if you use a water brush and it leaks out too much, it kind of messes up what you're trying to do. The blending marker has more control, so that's, if you're curious why I'm using that, that's the reason. And so I have the darker on the left, I have the next lightest color, and then I leave a little bit of white, and I'm going to blend that out with the blending marker, and now we're going to have a gradient look. This is the same exact type of shading that I did with the Copic markers, and I did that on purpose so that you can kind of make a comparison between the two. Doing this technique, pros and cons as far as compared to the alcohol markers, I would say that they both equally took the same amount of time. You go faster with the water brush pens. However, I love to go back with a second layer of the water brush because I feel like you get so much more of that drama with the coloring. So I really would say they took about the same amount of time. Now keep in mind you can go back on a second layer with alcohol markers as well if you like, and I do that as well often actually, depending on what I'm looking for my images. So I kept this in there, kind of slowed it down for a little bit. I'm going to skip ahead in just a minute, but I wanted to just make sure that you kind of saw what those differences were. So this one without the images on the candle is really easy to see how you're getting your blending and how that's working. So that's really good. Another thing to keep in mind with Bristol Smooth Cardstock is you want to make sure that you don't go more than 2 layers. Because you're using something that's wet, it will start to pill the paper after 2 rounds, I would say. That's been my experience. So 2 rounds, you should be good to go. All right, here I kept in what the second layer looks like, just this one piece. I wanted you to see what a second layer can do when it comes to giving that drama of the shadowing and the dimension on your coloring. And so that is right there. Oh, I love it. It's so great. These markers are so much fun to play with. I would say if you made me choose a coloring medium that you should, if you have nothing and you need to start and you want to practice and have some fun, I would say Arteza Real Brush pens, get them. That's the one thing I would say. They're not that expensive. You don't have to get a full set to have a lot of variation. You can actually get a small set, and instead of using a lighter and a darker color, just use the one color and then water. And so now you're blending that out and you're getting the dimension, you're getting the shading with a water brush pen. And so I would say this is probably the best bang for your buck if you're starting out and you want to just get one set of something. And there is the finished card for that. All right, so again, I finished this off. I did a little bit something different, although I used the same Celebrate die. I took some gray ink and I just stamped balloons in the background almost to look like a watermark. So I added that as well. All right, friends, buckle up because we are going way outside the crafty box here. We're going to do some coloring that you don't have to color. Maybe you don't feel like it. Maybe you just want to add color to something, but you don't want to actually have to worry about blending or shading or anything like that, and you just want to get some color down on paper. what I'm going to recommend to you to try is this dot coloring. So I am taking these two different alcohol markers and I'm going through and I'm dotting it. There is zero rhyme, zero reason on how I'm doing this. I'm not putting the darker color dots a certain place and the lighter colors a certain place. You could, that might be fun. I am just filling in as much as I can with dots and I'm adding them. I thought this technique was so fun to try. It's very different than anything I've ever done. And I also feel like it just really makes things move very fast and it's fun. And so that's what I'm doing here. And I wanted to make sure that I showed you 3 different examples of doing this. The first one is inside the actual image that's meant to be colored. Okay, so I'm going to go through and just speed this up quite a bit. And I'm going to add purples and pinks to the rest of these flowers. All right, so again, I want to just stress that there is no rhyme or reason for this. There's no method to what I'm doing except dotting. If you start to go too fast and you're not straight up and straight down, then you might get some streaking instead of dots. So that is one thing I would probably say that I learned along the way, that I was getting a little bit overzealous. I was going too fast and I was kind of pulling the marker across the image, and that's not what I was going for. And so if you want to go fast, just go straight up and down and fill in your images as much as you want. I mean, this is just for you to just get fun, get creative and have fun. So I skipped ahead a little bit. You can see the pinks getting filled in now. And yeah, so give that a try. That's dot coloring and it's super duper fun. I'll show you a little bit of a close-up here, and then I'm going to show you how I finished off this card. I don't walk you through the card finishing process for any of these, so I just want to make sure I shared the pictures. Just took a very simple hello die, and I added some gems. They're little diamonds. I really like, these are not meant for crafting. They're meant for nail art, and they're awesome. Flat on one side and so shiny. So those are great. Look outside of just crafting items for your stuff, because those are one of my favorites. All right, let's move into dot coloring outside the image. All right, so I'm going to stamp my image here using Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I did that, although I don't really think it matters what ink you use because I'm not going to be touching the image, but just in case I wanted an alcohol marker friendly ink. And so once I get my image stamped out, I'm going to dot all over the place outside of the image. Now, truth be told, in reflection, I went way overboard with this. What I would recommend is to sort of highlight the image just outside the image and not the entire panel behind it. So don't, if you don't like the way that I ended up this card, I totally get it, because it's not as visually pleasing for me as what I had envisioned in my mind. So I would recommend just kind of doing the dotting right outside the image and leave it at that. But this is the finished one right here. I did the entire background. It was a lot of fun and it looks fun and very confetti-y. But again, just kind of play with that when you're doing it outside the image. I just added a wish big to the center and added some sequins to it and just kind of kept that simple. But that's another option too, all right? Now my third option for dotting your images, this was kind of similar to the first one, but I'm not going to fill in the total image. And I thought balloons were the perfect example of how to do this, because we've seen these confetti balloons, which I think are so fun. So I'm going to stamp that out. I'm going to be using Memento Tuxedo Black ink for that. Again, ink doesn't matter with this one, but I am going to pull out my metallic markers. I have a blush gold, like rose gold rather, a regular gold, and a silver marker. And I am going to go ahead and make them look like those confetti balloons. I thought that was so much fun. In hindsight, I probably would try this card again. Instead of stamping it in black, stamp them out in silver and gold and heat emboss them, or sticky ink and then heat emboss them in silver and gold. I think that would be fun, because now you'll have like this conducive kind of image with the gold outer line and then the gold confetti inside. So I would do this card again. Definitely I would add that to it. So I'm just going to go through with those 3 different markers, and you can see I'm just kind of haphazardly putting it, but I'm not filling up the image. And so that's another way to do your dot coloring. So lots of fun, lots of examples. Definitely give it a try. I'm going to take my markers and I'm going to add strings to this. And then the last thing I'm going to do for this card, I do keep it in because I wanted to remind you that you can add color to your cards in so many ways. And one of them is to make your own frames. And so I take the card panel and I'm going to actually use my T-square ruler and one of those markers. So I chose the gold. It could be any marker you want. And I am going to draw lines to frame out the picture in the center, to frame out my balloons. So don't forget, there's so, like I said, so many options, but you can add the color in any which way you want to. So have fun with it. I thought one line wasn't enough, so I went back and I added another line. And so you're gonna see that coming up and what that's gonna look like. Here you can see I just added the word celebrate with a stamp and then heat embossed that in gold right across the center. I was really glad that I did that. It made it so easy to finish off that sentiment. All right, now we are going to have some watercolor fun in a different way. I'm not going to pay attention to what society tells me a flower should look like. I'm just going to create my own. So it's going to be oodles of fun. First, of course, I'm going to heat emboss my flower with some glittery embossing powder. And so this is different from using the white or the clear because I wanted to have a little bit of sparkle amidst the watercolor. So I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool. And then we are going to really, this is probably the fastest and the easiest way to color that I'm showing you. I wish I would have demoed even more because I went sort of like, you'll see. Okay, so I get that heat set, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out some watercolor markers. Again, I am using what I have in my stash because I have been neglectful, and that is why I'm pulling them out. You definitely use what you have, and you could reuse some of the things we did earlier on in this video, right, with the oxides and all that. I'm using the Jane Davenport pens. They are very saturated, very wet. You would think this would dry back. It does not. It basically stays this vibrant. So I'm just going through. Now you might have seen I put water on the cardstock first. Using watercolor cardstock, wet it down first with those kind of back and forth motion, and then I added my color. I am going to use a Ranger heat tool to kind of set this just a little bit. Really minimal warping, but I did tape it down. I should have taped it down first. I didn't think about it. And then I'm just going to kind of let that air dry. So once that's fully dried, I am going to take the coordinating die, and if you don't have coordinating dies, you can cut this out with scissors. But I am going to take the coordinating die, and I am going to run this through my Sizzix switch, my bigger die cutting machine. And then I'm going to have this beautifully cut piece right here. I was so happy with this. I thought it was so much fun. I probably could have blended the colors a little more, but I just didn't care. I thought it was so pretty. And honestly, you can even leave it as it was on the card panel and not cut it out, and just, have that sort of abstract look. So either way is great. But I did have this brick background that I made months ago that I said, Mary, don't throw that away because you're going to use it one day. And so I said, the day is here. It's it. I'm using it today or it's gone forever. And so I used that for my background. Now I'm trying to find a sentiment here, and I wanted to keep this tip in case you haven't seen me share it before. I highly recommend when you're going to use or heat emboss sentiments onto black cardstock like I'm doing here. This is my favorite way to put sentiments on a card. Do them all at once. And then because these sentiments are so small, I can actually flip my card panel around and do the other side without moving any of those stamps. And now I have so many sentiments ready to go, ready to be cut out and added to my projects. And it's one less thing that I have to worry about when I'm in the creative process. I don't think that adding sentiments necessarily for me is quite as much fun as the creative process before it. And so I'd rather just kind of have this done. Okay, so I'm going to add lots of foam tape to my flowers. And I love the dimension because it just really has it, obviously it's literally and figuratively, literally and artistically popping off of the background. So I'm going to add that there, and I'm going to just add my little sentiment right to the top left-hand side of my card, and everything is just really coming together. Now I pulled out those gems again, and I wanted to let you know that sometimes when you send gems in a card, they pop through the envelope when you send them through the mail. But if you have your main image popped up like I do, and then you put the gems back on the background, that difference between the two means that the envelope's not going to be able to be broken with the gems. So keep that in mind. So if you want to add gems, maybe pop up your image a little bit more and then put your gems or your pearls back onto the background, and that way you can avoid that mishap. So that's something I was thinking about as I was doing this. And there, my friends, is the finished card for this super easy and fast and fun watercoloring method. Okay, have we done enough? Are you tired of hearing me talk? Because this was a very long video. I'm really hoping it inspired you to pull out what you have, to maybe try some new mediums. It was just so much fun, and there's so many ways that you can color, and so get in there and just have a good time. All right, everything I used, everything I showed or talked about, that's all going to be listed below the description in this video. If you want to check that out, you can click those links. Most of them are going to be affiliate links. If you're curious what that is, that means that if you purchase something, the company that you're buying from gives a small commission to the person who sent you there, and it's at no cost to you, in case you were curious what affiliate even means. All right, other than that, I will also put links below. You can check out if you want to connect in other platforms. I'm trying to build up the Instagram, and so if you want to join me over there as well, you'll see that link, and you'll see a link to my Etsy shop, as well as a newsletter if you'd like to join me there. I send out lots of free downloads and lots of updates, just things like that. All right, I will see you all in the comments down below and in the next video. Bye-bye.